On the morning of the 8th of February, 1587, in the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle, in the flat country of Northamptonshire, a stage had been built overnight. It stood 2 feet high, draped in black, set with a low wooden block and a single chair. 300 people had been let in to watch. A fire burned at the far end of the hall against the February cold. A woman of 44 was brought in to die on that stage. She was tall, and she moved like someone much older than her years. When the black outer gown was taken from her, she stood in a bodice and petticoat of deep crimson, the color the Catholic Church keeps for its martyrs. She knelt at the block, and the axe came down and missed. It took 3 strokes of the blade to take her head from her shoulders. The first came down above her neck entirely. That is the detail the story has never let go of. For 400 years, it has been told as clumsiness, or as squeamishness, or as an executioner unmanned by the rank of the woman under his axe. Almost nobody asks the question a pathologist asks first, not how many times the blade fell. Where the first one landed, and what the body underneath it had been trying to say for years. The subject is a biological female, aged 44 years and 2 months at death. Born at Linlithgow Palace in Scotland on the 8th of December, 1542. Died at Fotheringhay Castle in England on the 8th of February, 1587. She had been a queen since she was 6 days old. She had been a prisoner in England for the last 19 of those years. Preservation. This is one of the rare cases on this table where a post-mortem was actually performed at the time of death. After the execution, her body was opened and embalmed. The internal organs were removed and, by order, buried in secret somewhere inside Fotheringhay Castle, where they remain to this day. The body was sealed under heavy lead. It was buried once, moved once, and it lies now in Westminster Abbey, a few steps from the woman who signed the order that ended it. Cause of death per the historical record, decapitation, manner, execution. On those 2 words, the record has always felt no need to say more. A queen was condemned, a queen was beheaded. The headsman made a poor job of it. Case closed. What we are doing today is rebuilding the autopsy. Not to argue she was murdered. She was killed in full daylight, under the law, in front of 300 witnesses, by a warrant with a queen's seal on it. The question is narrower and stranger than murder. Why did the axe fall 3 times? Which blow actually killed her? And why did a woman of 44 have the body of a woman of 70? Cause of death, mechanism, manner, time. Hold the conventional account in your head first, because it is the one the paintings were made from. Mary Stuart had crossed into England in the spring of 1568, a reigning queen driven out of her own kingdom, expecting shelter from her cousin Elizabeth. Instead, she was held, house to house, castle to castle, for nearly 19 years, while she became the living hope of every plot to put a Catholic back on the English throne. In the summer of 1586, one of those plots, the Babington conspiracy, was allowed to ripen until her own letters could be read as consent to Elizabeth's murder. She was tried at Fotheringhay in October of 1586, under a statute written almost for her by name. She was condemned. Elizabeth signed the death warrant on the 1st of February, 1587, and then spent days insisting she had meant it to stay in the drawer. It was used. 7 days later, Mary was dead. The execution is one of the most documented deaths of the century because Lord Burghley had it recorded. A man named Robert Winkfield stood in that hall as an official observer and wrote down what he saw, and his account traveled across Europe within months. It is from Winkfield and the men beside him that we get the scene the world remembers. the crimson petticoat, the prayers in Latin, the blindfold, the 3 strokes, the small dog found hiding in her skirts that would not leave the body, and the moment the executioner reached down to lift the severed head by its auburn hair and came up holding a wig, while the head itself dropped and rolled across the boards. For 4 centuries, the 3 strokes have been read as one simple thing. The headsman lost his nerve. A professional fumbled the most important cut of his career because his hands were shaking over an anointed queen. That reading is less wrong than it is incurious. It skips the one question the record actually answers. The number of strokes is not the finding. The direction of the first one is, start where the blade started, because Wingfield is precise about it, and the precision is the whole case. The first blow struck the back of her head, well above the neck. It came down high, into the skull, into bone that sat above the target. The second blow found the neck and cut through it, all but a single cord of gristle. The executioner then worked the edge of the axe through that last cord by hand. 2 strokes and a cut, 3 falls of the blade, a head that should have come away in 1. To understand why that happens, understand the tool. The axe is a vertical impact instrument. The condemned is laid forward, the head set down on a low block, the neck stretched across it, and the blade is brought straight down from above with the executioner's full weight behind it. The whole method depends on a single thing. The blade has to land in the gap, the narrow 2-inch band of exposed neck between the base of the skull and the top of the shoulders. Miss that band by an inch toward the head, and the axe meets skull. Miss it toward the body, and it meets shoulder and spine. I have examined the other side of this exact failure on this channel. In the case of Margaret Pole, put to death by axe in the Tower of London 46 years before this one, the blade came down too low, over and over, into the shoulders and the upper back. An untrained substitute swinging at an elderly woman whose neck sat lower than he expected. That execution took far more than 3. Here the miss runs the opposite way. The first blow at Fotheringhay landed too high, into the back of the skull. The axe has 2 ways to fail, and these 2 deaths are the matched pair. One blade that fell short of the neck from below, one that overshot it from above. Why high? Here. The block at Fotheringhay was low, and a subject kneeling forward over a low block drops the crown of the head and lifts the base of the skull straight into the arc of the swing. She was blindfolded, reciting the Psalms, and by every account, moving slightly. The margin was 2 inches, and the first swing spent it on bone above the neck. Whatever the man's nerve, the geometry did the rest. This is the axe being an unreliable instrument on a small target in a charged room, which is the whole nature of the tool. It is exactly why, half a century earlier, an expert swordsman had been shipped across the channel to take the head of another condemned queen in a single clean horizontal stroke. The sword was reliable. The axe was a gamble every time. That accounts for where the blade landed. The body it landed on is another finding entirely, because the strangest finding at Fotheringhay is not in the neck. It is in the hair. When the wig came away and the head fell, the men in that hall saw hair cut short and, in Wingfield's own record, as gray as a woman of 70, the head of a woman of 70. She was 44. The auburn the world pictures was a wig she had worn for years. Underneath it, the body had aged decades past the calendar. That gray is a finding, and it stands beside several others. The record of Mary's health across her captivity reads like the chart of a chronically ill woman, 30 years older than she was. Recurrent, disabling pain in the limbs the 16th century called rheumatism, bad enough that she was sent to take the waters for it more than once. Episodes of violent abdominal pain and vomiting reaching back to her teens. Spells of weakness in the legs that left her unable to walk unaided in her final years, carried to her own trial in a chair. She had grown stout and stooped and round-shouldered, a body worn to the condition of old age 2 decades early. Modern medicine has floated a name for that pattern, and it is worth naming carefully because it is a hypothesis rather than a verdict. The physicians Ida McAlpin and Richard Hunter, tracing the medical history of the royal line, argued that the recurring attacks of abdominal agony, limb pain, and mental disturbance that ran through this family were the signature of acute porphyria, an inherited metabolic disorder. Mary sits at the head of that proposed line. A descendant of hers, generations down the same blood, was George III, whose own attacks of pain and derangement are the most famous case the theory rests on. Whether the exact diagnosis holds is still argued among historians and physicians. What is certain is that the body under that wig had been failing and in pain for most of her adult life. I examined a woman once in a county in the high desert of northern New Mexico. She was 44 years old. On the table she read like a woman of 70, the bone thinned, the joints worn through, the hair gone gray and brittle, the organs of someone at the far end of a long life. Chronic disease had done to her in 4 decades what time usually needs 7 to do. When I read what those witnesses wrote about the aged head that fell at Fotheringhay, that is the table I think of. The wig was the last thing hiding how old this body had already made itself. There is one more observation from that morning that has unsettled people for 400 years, and it has a clean answer. Winkfield and others recorded that after the head was off, the lips went on moving, opening and closing for as long as a quarter of an hour. It reads like horror. It is physiology. The muscles of the face and jaw can keep firing on residual oxygen and on reflex arcs in the brainstem and cord for minutes after the blood supply is cut. It is reflex. It is chemistry running out, the same twitch a muscle gives after death on any table. The person was gone. The wiring took a few minutes to catch up. If the work of taking a death, the record closed in a single line, and opening it back to the body underneath is the kind of thing you came here for, the subscribe button is where you tell me to keep bringing them. There is another one along shortly. Then there is the post-mortem itself, which is the part of this case that makes it a real autopsy file, and not only a reconstruction. Mary's body was opened after death. That was standard for a royal corpse that had to be preserved for a delayed funeral, and hers waited nearly 6 months before she was buried with ceremony. The organs were taken out, as embalming required, and then, by order, her entrails were buried in secret within Fotheringhay Castle itself, so that no relic of a Catholic queen could be carried off and venerated. That secret burial is the reason there is no tissue to examine now, and it is its own kind of evidence. The people who ended her were still afraid of the body afterward. They embalmed it, sealed it under lead, and hid its organs in the ground of the castle where she died. You go to that trouble only over a corpse you are still afraid of. Set what the record said against what the body says. The record says the execution was botched by a nervous headsman and files the 3 strokes under his failure of nerve. The body says the first stroke was a geometric miss, high into the skull, off an unreliable instrument aimed at a 2-inch target on a kneeling, blindfolded, moving subject. And it says, the second stroke, the one that found the neck, is the one that actually killed her. The first blow wounded the skull and likely drove her past consciousness. The killing was done by the second. The third was housekeeping. The record remembers a beautiful woman of 44 with auburn hair. The body says the auburn was a wig. The hair beneath it belonged to old age, and the woman inside it had been ill and in pain for most of her life. The record shudders at the lips that moved after death. The body says that was reflex, not survival. The only thing on that scaffold that behaved simply was the little dog that crept out from under her skirts and lay down between her head and her shoulders and had to be carried away and washed. It grieved in a straight line. Everyone else spent 400 years misreading what they had watched. The medical answer, laid out, is almost simple. The part that has been filed wrong is the category the death was put in. Now the finding. Cause of death. Complete transection of the cervical spinal cord and the great vessels of the neck, producing immediate collapse of central nervous function and rapid exsanguination. On the sequence the witnesses recorded, that transection was delivered by the second stroke of the axe. The first stroke was a non-fatal cranial injury to the back of the skull. The third was post-mortem separation of the remaining soft tissue. Mechanism of death. Instantaneous disruption of the brain and cord from the neck below, with catastrophic hemorrhage. Death by this mechanism is as close to instant as the body offers. Whatever the lips did for the next quarter hour, the person was gone at the second blow. Manner of death. Homicide. That word tends to stop people, set against a lawful execution, so let me be exact about what it means. Forensic pathology recognizes 5 manners of death: natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, undetermined. There is no 6th box marked lawful or sanctioned or deserved. A death deliberately brought about by the hand of another person is a homicide, in the strict classifying sense, whether it happens in an alley or on a scaffold under a queen's seal. The manor records who caused the death, and only that. The morality is a separate question. So is the law. Mary Stuart's death files as homicide the way every judicial execution before and since has. The law that ordered it and the pathology that classifies it are answering 2 different questions. The category history actually filed this under is neither of those. History filed it under the executioner's clumsy hands. 3 strokes, a bungled job, a queen made to suffer by an incompetent. The body refiles it. The strokes were the axe being the axe. The suffering, such as it was over at the second blow. And the thing that made this death remarkable had nothing to do with the number of times the blade fell. It was the body it fell on, which had been telling the truth about her age and her illness for years, under a wig, to anyone willing to look. They buried her first at Peterborough, in the same cathedral where another queen this crown had needed gone. Catherine of Aragon already lay in the ground. 2 discarded queens under one roof. Then, in 1612, Mary's son, by then king of both England and Scotland, had her taken up and carried to Westminster Abbey, and laid beneath a marble far grander than the tomb of the cousin who had killed her. She lies there still, a few steps from Elizabeth. The prisoner outlasted the jailer in stone. The wig is the whole case. For years she had hidden the ashen hair, hidden how far ahead of her the aging had run, and shown her keepers and her portraitists a queen still in her prime. The axe took 3 strokes to finish its work, and on the last one the disguise came away in the headsman's hand and fell, and the head beneath it told the truth the wig had been keeping. A woman of 44, gray as 70, worn through by 19 years of illness and captivity, already dead in the single heartbeat between the first blow and the second. 3 strokes of an unreliable blade. One body 2 decades older than its years. And a manner of death that files under homicide no matter whose seal had dried on the warrant. That is the report. The rest is the painting. If a body came to your table from a decapitation that took 3 strokes, and the record insisted the first blow was nothing but clumsiness, but the wound sat high in the back of the skull, above the neck, exactly where an axe overshoots a low block, would you sign the first blow as the cause of death or the second? And would you write the manner as homicide, knowing a queen's warrant had ordered it? Tell me which line you would put first. I read every comment. Thanks for watching.